Good afternoon. We are here with Heidi Kroner, Ask an Expert through Ask Resource Center. Heidi brings a wealth of experience through Aspire Academy. She began her pursuit to helping children with dyslexia when she finally learned this is why her child was struggling so much with spelling and writing. There was a lack of service in the area. She is founder of Decoding Dylsexia Iowa, True Potential Education, and Aspire Academy. Heidi is certified in the Wilson Reading System and Orton-Gillingham method. The Wilson Reading System aligns with the science of reading and how the brain best learns to read. It is backed by 60 years of NIH research and is a premier program for getting many children off to better decoding and spelling when they fall behind and cannot track the code. So we welcome Heidi.
As Deb mentioned, I'm here today to talk as an advocate and a mother of a child who struggled with reading, writing, and spelling, and I couldn't figure out why. And so I also knew that I had two very, very smart brothers who were engineers and electricians who also struggled with reading. So when my son started to struggle, I was like, I have to find out what this is because it took my brothers 6 and 8 years to get their undergraduate degrees, and I did not want that to happen for my son. There's a lot of misinformation about dyslexia and the struggle to read. Some of it is that it only affects reading. And for my son, and for a lot of the students I get, it affects spelling more than it affects reading. So today I'm going to talk to you about what the warning signs are, what a parent should do if they notice these signs, how to get a diagnosis of dyslexia. Do you need a diagnosis? What questions to ask a diagnostician? And now that you have a diagnosis, now what do you do? So, and then tutoring as an option for parents. And then what are some available resources if tutoring isn't financially feasible? So dyslexia is like eye color. It is like blue eyes. It varies. Everything on the human genome varies because human beings are complex individuals. Also, dyslexia it takes 4 gene types to come together. And so everybody has a little bit different variety. So I tell people to think about it like blue eyes. We all know those people with kind of denim blue, gray eyes. That's what runs in my family. But then I have a niece with this Caribbean blue. So we see that blue run that whole continuum from kind of a purplish blue to more of that, like what I call Caribbean blue. And dyslexia is the same way. It can affect reading, writing, and spelling. And what I have learned is spelling is the window into how we read. So I will tutor some students who can read pretty good, but their spelling and their handwriting are atrocious. So you have to be able to train yourself to see it. But once you train yourself to see it, it's very, very obvious. The first thing I'd like to talk about is there are 44 symptoms. And if you want a full list of symptoms, 2 resources. You can go to Aspire Academy, my website. I have a symptom checklist there. Also, the International Dyslexia Association. That's where I base my symptoms on. Dyslexia is not always going to show itself in a child's reading, but it will always show up in spelling, and it affects spelling more than reading, like I said earlier. And then the checklist is a great tool for parents. You show more than 10 symptoms, you should be evaluated for dyslexia. I screen for dyslexia. I cannot diagnose it just because I don't have a master's degree in the right things. So I give 2 tests that look at, do you have the biological warning signs? We're going to talk about what those are. And then is it affecting your ability to decode, to spell, and to write? So here's one quick thing. 80% of kids who are in special education for reading have dyslexia. The Iowa schools cannot diagnose it. We are a non-categorical state. We look for symptoms, but we don't diagnose. So if your child is on an IEP for reading, you should seek out a screen or a full diagnosis from an educational psychologist. The best place in Iowa to get a list of qualified educational psychologists is to contact Decoding Dyslexia Iowa. So Decoding Dyslexia Iowa has its own website and Facebook page, and they will send you a list of the 10 to 20 diagnosticians in the state of Iowa that can diagnose dyslexia. The trouble is right now with COVID, the waiting lists are backed up about 9 to 12 months. So screenings are very popular as well. True Potential Education does screenings, and so does Aspire Academy. A screening will give the test to see if you're showing major warning signs and if an Orton-Gillingham reading program would be appropriate. And what that does for you is your child can start working in a program that will fit their learning style before they get diagnosed. 7 to 20% of the population has some degree of dyslexia. Dyslexia is when you don't use the sounding out part of your brain, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, to read. It is a language learning disability. It affects reading, writing, and spelling. The medical field has done 60 years of research on this reading problem, reading, writing, and spelling problem, but the educational establishment has not utilized the findings, which is why we have the big disconnect and the poor reading skills of these children in our schools. It's not related to intelligence. It travels across all IQ levels. At Aspire, we have students with IQs of 70 and we have IQs of 120, 130. It literally affects all intelligence levels. What happens with really smart kids is everybody assumes they're being lazy and not trying hard enough. And then most of the time it just gets diagnosed as they're not trying hard enough. So dyslexia, the typical reader is going to read with the entire left side of their brain. And they're going to use something called the sounding out part of their brain. I'm going to get my little spotlight here. So they're using the whole left side of their brain. And this is the sounding out part of the brain, the part of the brain that says camp, begins with k, ends with p. And I hear an A and an M in the middle. And dyslexic children, they don't know why yet, start reading with the facial recognition side of their brain. And they don't use the sounding out part of their brain hardly at all. And they have a very, very hard time memorizing sounds and assigning them to a letter. And so the reason they spell was as saw is that they're not using the left sounding out part of their brain to say, oh, was starts with a w, ends with a z. It's W-A-S or W-A-Z. And because they're not using that part of their brain, they're trying to memorize what the word looks like. And what a lot of people tell us is it's like reading with telephone numbers. And they are not assigning that sound to that letter. So think about reading music and how hard it is sometimes for us to learn to read music. If we don't assign the sound that we hear with A to that little black note on the second space, it's just like with reading. We are assigning the B sound to the letter B. We're assigning the D sound to the letter D. If we're reversing the B's and D's, it makes it very hard. So we're going to talk a little bit more about symptoms. So there are 5 building blocks to reading, and children with dyslexia struggle with the very bottom, most basic part of reading, phonemic awareness. And this is usually taught in preschool and kindergarten. And when a child struggles to learn this most basic part, they can't learn phonics. And then they can't build up and decode complex vocabulary. They can't become a fluent reader, and their comprehension suffers. And if this phonemic awareness area is not addressed, they're going to keep struggling in reading. How do you tell if they have a phonemic awareness problem? They're going to be late to talk. They're going to be behind their peers in speech. They might have a list. They're going to be the kids who say hangaber instead of hamburger, was instead of animals, calipitter instead of caterpillar. They're going to be messing up words with 3 or more syllables. They're going to say honka-conker instead of helicopter, lawnmower instead of lawnmower. Those are the types of mistakes they'll be making in preschool. They're going to have trouble with rhyming. They may know how to write their name, but not recognize their name tag. Recognizing their name in print will be very hard. They might be, you got all these educational alphabet toys, and they'd rather play with them as Legos than learn that A, apple, A. So they have trouble learning and reciting the alphabet. They have extreme problems learning to write their name, their last name, and their middle name. They may confuse left and right. So then there's all these calendar activities that they do in preschool. If you ever sit in a preschool class, not only do they sing the alphabet, they'll have a days of the week song, they'll have a months of the year song. These are things they don't pick up on. Everybody else can sing the song, but they can't. Another symptom is they may be like, mom, that thing. They can't recall a name quickly. They have a hard time following multi-step directions. Here comes my puppy. And they have difficulty learning numbers, shapes, and colors. Preschool remedies for schools for kids showing the warning signs is really practicing calendar time, working with them on maybe making a picture list for directions, ordering a book about phonemic awareness activities, reading a lot of Dr. Seuss and books that rhyme. This book here, Phonemic Awareness for Young Children, has plenty of good games for parents. It's also a great tool for preschool teachers, and it builds those phonemic awareness abilities so that the child can learn the skills to manipulate words. In kindergarten and first grade, they're going to be very slow to master their letter sounds. They're probably not going to master their vowel sounds at all. They're going to have trouble with short vowel sounds, especially E and I. Letters and words are going to be out of order, or complete sounds will be missing. So if they're trying to write a story about plant, they may have write plat over and over again because they can't remember all 5 sounds when they're trying to write out that word. They may confuse their E and I's and write pin for when they're talking about a pen. Their letters are going to be out of order. So they may have all the letters, but they can't remember the order. So if they're doing a spelling test or they're having to spell the word like block, they may have the B, the O, the L, and the CK, but they're all out of order. They cannot sound out words. If you're telling them, hey, just let's sound out that word. What does P say? If they're trying to read the word pet, they can't recall it. They want to shut down. They don't want to read it. They'll just guess. And they cannot break words out into separate sounds. So like if you want to say, well, you can spell dog, let's just sound it out. D-A-G. That will mean Greek to them. And then their handwriting is well below their peers. Here's an example of kindergarten. This child is making, didn't spell laid right, but they understood that they could use a silent E. The mom bird laid 4 eggs. This child is a child that was diagnosed with dyslexia. I like to play with my friends playing soccer. So you can kind of see the I like to, and this is probably with my, and then they could hear the F and the R, but they don't know that it's an E. They can hear the N, but they just really kind of don't know. But then you can obviously see that child is playing with soccer. So that's 2 children the same age, both in kindergarten. And so when you see this type of handwriting, this type of spelling, this type of everything all out of order, those are big red flags that your child is going to be needing extra help with reading and should be screened for dyslexia or into an educational psychologist. Educational psychologists are really good because they can typically diagnose more than dyslexia. They can tell you if there's some attention deficit going on, if the handwriting is severe enough to be called dysgraphia, and then they can also tell if your child has something called dysnomia, which is slow recall. And if your child has slow recall, then they need more time on tests. So getting that full evaluation can really help you understand your child's learning style and learning profile. Questions to ask a diagnostician if you think your child is at the risk for dyslexia. Again, I would contact Decoding Dylsexia Iowa. They have a list on what to ask. The nice thing about their Decoding Dyslexia's educational evaluation recommendations, their list of preferred providers, is they've already asked them all these questions and know that they will diagnose dyslexia according to the International Dyslexia Association's guidelines. And that's really what you're looking for. You want somebody who will look at the handwriting, the spelling, the reading, their listening comprehension, and their reading comprehension, and give you a full picture to see what are their strengths and what are causing their weaknesses. Here's another example of two kids in first grade and their first grade spelling test versus this girl's Lego story. You can see a lot of frequent reversals, which is right-left confusion. That's why dyslexics not only reverse B's and D's, but also 3s, 4s, numbers like that. Sometimes they reverse N's, is they have left-right confusion. So you got this was shed, this was luck, so she reversed the CK and the L. Shell, she couldn't hear the sh and the ch. We think they're far apart, shell, but they're actually very close in the mouth. Any child who is recommended for speech services in preschool or kindergarten, you should highly watch them for dyslexia, because sometimes it's the way the brain processes sound that will cause the dyslexia. And if you're not processing the sound correctly, if you can't hear the difference between the sh and the ch, you might have to be taught to feel it. And then you have to assign that again to that letter, the ch. So as you can see, this can get pretty complex real quick, huh? Nuts, nets, I'm not sure what that LEC was supposed to be. This was bugs. Again, the S is first because she's not using the sounding out part of her brain to say that the sound was the last sound in the word bugs. She just is trying to remember that the word has the B, the U, the G, and the S. I think that was swish, so she didn't have her correct vowel sound. This was chap. So this was gold. That's actually spelled right. She'll capitalize the D because she can't remember which way it should go. And so a capital D and a capital B both go the same way. So these kids have more of a severe case of dyslexia, but when you see this and a teacher says, oh, she'll grow out of it, don't listen to that. Again, when we look at dyslexia, usually the story recall and the oral comprehension, if somebody reads them a story, if somebody gives them oral information, they will score on the right side of the bell curve, which is usually above average. But what's causing their deficits is these phonological issues, phonological memory, phonological awareness. That's causing problems with them being able to read. Why do these languages occur? Poor phonological awareness, poor ability to apply sounds to letters for automatic retrieval causes poor inventive spelling. It blocks the ability to sound out words. And then these students need greater repetition and more explicit instruction in this phonemic awareness to master reading. So what do you get when you go to a tutor? So if you get screened for dyslexia and you get a diagnosis of dyslexia, or the screening says, yes, your child is showing all the warning signs of dyslexia, what you want is a explicit cumulative phonics program that's going to work on all 5 building blocks of reading. So Orton-Gillingham methods do that. The West Des Moines school system and the Waukee school system have now adopted Orton-Gillingham programs. West Des Moines uses Spire, S-P-I-R-E, and Waukee uses Really Great Reading. So when your child is going to these schools and on an IEP for reading, writing, or spelling, they should possibly be getting those programs. You can ask. Orton-Gillingham is a method. It's like an umbrella program, and underneath it, people have created their own version of that program. So Barton is an Orton-Gillingham program. Wilson is an Orton-Gillingham program. Really Great Reading, Spire. There's also one called Pure OG. So those types of programs. Now, for some kids, their dyslexia is so severe that they need the help in school plus outside tutoring. And you want Sylvan Learning Center and those types of learning centers do not use Orton-Gillingham programs. If you're suspecting dyslexia, if you have a diagnosis of dyslexia, you will want to search out a tutor who has her certification in Orton-Gillingham. So if your child is in 2nd or 3rd grade, they may be making some progress in school, but what you're going to notice is that they're going to leave suffixes off of words. Again, can't sound out words, still is mispronouncing multi-syllable words, words with more than 3 syllables. They'll get tongue-tied, can't read domestic, can't say domestic. They'll wildly guess at words while reading. They will skip sight words and misread them, reading on as or this as the, things like that. They have a lot of confusion over words that look similar, like when and then. Their spelling is terrible. If you ask them vowel sounds or what sounds do letters make, they may have trouble with that, and they'll still be reversing letters. Silent E will be a mystery for kids with dyslexia in 2nd grade. They'll be guessing and needing contextual clues to read a passage. They may have difficulty learning their math facts and telling time. They'll be transposing numbers when they're trying to do addition, mixing up their math signs and processes. They'll do better in social studies and science because the teacher will be reading, explaining, and typically our kids aren't reading out of textbooks for social studies and science. The teachers are up there explaining everything. Those classes, they'll tend to do way better than language arts. They're still below average in reading. They may say, oh, well, they're at the kind of the top part of the bottom group. And they'll still have difficulty following multi-step directions. They may be getting in trouble. Well, you weren't listening. You know, how many times do I have to tell you that? These kids have a lot of trouble with multi-step directions. It's getting harder to find out if our kids are poor spellers because we have moved to this curriculum called Words Your Way, where our kids sort their words based on spelling patterns. It's a research program. It's not necessarily a bad program, but then parents don't have that weekly check of, is my child mastering spelling? And that is truly a very important part of finding out if a child has dyslexia. In 2nd and 3rd grade, homework will become a real fight and very hard for children, and they may have to spend extraordinary amounts of time on homework. Their handwriting is not improving, and they're continuing their letter numbers and reversals. Classroom strengths, they're going to be bright and articulate when speaking, could tell you a story a mile long. They could have great spoken vocabulary despite lower reading skills. They do well in social studies and science. They can summarize and answer questions to things you discuss orally in class. They may do really poor on their tests despite having been very interested and participatory in science and social studies. Their spelling and writing skills will always be worse than their reading skills. So again, here's another example. We're not expecting perfect spelling out of kids in 2nd grade. Pizza is a dough with tomato sauce. But here's a kid with that phonological problem. Churn on the water to the shower. So he's hearing that CH, that T as a CH. He didn't learn that the suffix ER, water, okay? get in the bathtub. That's actually hair, soap, squish. He's using an E instead of an I. Hasn't learned his sight word for some. Wipe, hasn't mastered silent E's, reversing that P. So these are all sure, no vowels whatsoever. Keep. So really struggling with internalizing what we call the code. Again, you're going to have those scores that are on the low side for phonological awareness and high side for a story recall. In 4th to 8th grade, the students who previously got by will now become overwhelmed by the amount of independent reading, complex vocabulary, and speed at which learning takes place. So your child kind of struggled in 1st through 3rd grade, but teachers kept saying, oh, they'll get it, they'll get it. And then in 4th through 8th grade, writing that state report, handling social studies. 6th grade science, they're talking about digestive and intestinal and all these big words, and your child will not be able to read these words. My son, after tutoring for 2 years with Orton-Gillingham, when he got into 6th grade and we were working on a social studies homework together, he said, Mom, without Dawn, I would have never been able to read these words. And I knew we wouldn't. So 4th through 8th grade is going to become really hard, and kids will withdraw and not want to do homework. Symptoms in 4th through 8th grade are you never get out of special ed. There's been a history of reading and spelling struggles. Their independent reading choices are consistently way below grade level, a lot of graphic novels, still maybe trying to read Magic Tree House, significant problems with multisyllable words when reading, frequent sight word errors, poor fluency and poor spelling. Their FAST tests are going to have really low scores. Again, they're still going to be reversing. They're not going to put any punctuation or capitalization when they're writing. They're going to have difficulty organizing for writing because dyslexia is a language-based learning disorder. And when you have to put reading, writing, spelling, and handwriting all together, do it quickly, fastly, and fluently, these kids just fall apart. So that's what you're going to be seeing in 4th through 8th grade. And if you see that, you need to get a screen. You can ask your school to do a specific learning disability assessment, ask specifically from the Heartland AEA, ask for it in writing, go and talk to the principal in person, here's another thing. I'm going to hit stop share for a while and just talk. What are the benefits of getting the diagnosis? So the benefits of getting a diagnosis is some kids don't struggle enough in school to receive special education. If you get a diagnosis, then they can get a 504 plan. And a 504 plan are accommodations that that don't cost the school money, but will make the school environment accessible to your child. So for a child with dyslexia, 504 accommodations give them more time to take a test. If they don't finish in a half hour, they get extra time on that test. If they don't do well on that test and you knew that they studied that material, you can request to have the test given to them orally, that somebody read the test to them. They can have their standardized testings read to them, except for the reading part, like the social studies part or the math part, things like that. You can the 504 plan says they can't be punished and kept in for recess to finish work that they weren't able to finish because it's hard and laborious for them to get it done. So 504 accommodations are very important for kids who are not going to qualify for an IEP because they're not scoring in below the 15th percentile. It's very hard to get an IEP and you have to be very, very low in reading to get it. If you have an IEP, you still would want to possibly get a diagnosis because your child may grow out of the IEP. And this way they will get those 504 accommodations through junior high and high school. If you get diagnosed in high school, you can even take your accommodations to college, to law school. The diagnosis can be very powerful. The diagnosis will also tell you if there's more than just reading, writing, and spelling problems going on. Is there some attention deficit? Is there dysgraphia, trouble with handwriting, trouble with putting ideas together? Do they have that thing called dysnomia where they trouble with recall? They need extra time on tests for that. Dysnomia can cause a lot of anxiety. Dysnomia will allow children to maybe get the directions set next to them, have it go up and ask the teacher to have the directions repeated without being scolded. So those are reasons you would want to get a diagnosis to qualify for a 504 plan or to maybe get better programs and help with the IEP. Then once you have the diagnosis, you want to give it to your school, and you want to seek out the type of programs that the psychologist listed on that program, on that sheet that would help them. You want to look for a private tutor who can do the Orton-Gillingham method, and if you can't afford that, the Barton method is one that you can purchase yourself and teach to your child. There's another really cost-effective one called Orton-Gillingham Online. And for $500, again, you can take training and teach your child that method. Those are the things I have today. If you would have any questions, you can feel free to contact me via the Aspire Academy website. Just go to aspireiowa.com and hit the Contact Us page and write me a question.
Heidi, great information. I really appreciated the way you unlayered reading and how the brain works and the importance of that phonemic awareness for families. So this is great information about what those foundations look like. We say it in school, we say it to families, we say it to teachers, but you really helped unlayer that. We do have a couple of questions I'd like to have you speak to. So one question is, if a family is told by their school district that they will not use Orton-Gillingham programs and methods, how can a family advocate for appropriate reading instruction after receiving a diagnosis?
Okay, that's one that a lot of families really struggle with, and I do not have a good answer for that. Typically, you can ask for it, but they don't have to give it, is how I understand it. And that's why I am in business and I help start other centers like True Potential Education. Apples of Gold helped me and True Potential Education start because we want to get these programs somehow available to students. But yeah, searching up a tutor who is certified in an Orton-Gillingham program and trying to find something that fits your budget is the best I can tell you.
Thank you. Another question we have is, if my child with dyslexia, is older, upper elementary, is there hope for him or her to learn to read well, still without early interventions? And you kind of touched on that, but could you just a tiny bit expand on that?
I tell everybody, because we get lots of 7th and 8th graders, I have just as many 7th and 8th graders as I have 1st and 2nd graders, literally, and it is not too late. And usually within 2.5 years of an Orton-Gillingham program, we can get those kids reading on grade level or above grade level. And I've done it many, many times, and the kids are thrilled.
Perfect. Another really good question we have, and I, being a past administrator, I would see this. My child is above grade level reader, but has issues with spelling and hearing the correct sounds. What could that be related to?
So that is, a lot of times, that is kids who have a really good picture memory, but still aren't using that back left side of the sounding out part of their brain. And that was very much my son. He could read books, but I kept looking at that spelling and that handwriting and thinking, you're never going to be able to go to college with that. And I tell people, we all have seen those things on Facebook with the backwards 3s and the 5s for the S's, and we can still read it. And that's how these kids are reading. But it's only going to work to a certain level. And then about 7th, 8th grade and high school, it's going to again start to fall apart because all the words get too big and they can't break them apart. So that is still a warning sign. It's the warning sign they're not using that backside of the brain.
very well explained. Somebody mentioned in here that they really appreciated the way you unlocked or unlayered the Orton-Gillingham method, and that there are many approaches, curriculums under that umbrella, and also that the examples were super helpful. One person wrote, I felt like I was looking at my own child's writing. So you really resonated this morning, or this afternoon, I mean, with folks around just unlayering all of it. You did a great job of I can tell you've explained it to a lot of families before. So you did a very nice job. I don't see any other questions. Anything else you want to add? I do know that you and I want to follow up through Ask Resource Center this fall and give parents an opportunity to ask you questions. So we'll be providing that this fall with Heidi, ongoing conversation. So thank you again, Heidi. Anything else for the audience that you would like to say?
Okay, I guess I'll just put another push towards, even if they're in high school and they haven't been helped. I have tutored many 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. I've tutored 3 college students, and again, the right reading program can be life-changing, and I work hard also to push to get more schools to recognize this and use the right programs. And some school districts are listening, like Waukee and West Des Moines are using these programs. So,
all right. Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon with Ask an Expert with Heidi Kroner. And Heidi, again, thank you for sharing your time and your expertise.
thank you.